Hi, it's Steve. Today we're going to show you how to change the heater assembly on your dryer, and it's a really easy job. All we're going to need is a 1/4-inch nut driver, a small flat blade screwdriver, a number 2 Phillips screwdriver, and maybe a pair of needle nose pliers. Let me show you how we do it. Now before we begin this repair, the first thing we'll need to do is to disconnect power to the dryer. So if it has a cord on it, simply unplug it. And if it's a hardwired dryer, you'll need to locate the fuse or breaker panel and turn the power off there. Once we've done that, we can next pull the dryer far enough forward that we can access 2 screws at the top that secure the main top to the cabinet. So we'll start by taking those out and just lift up slightly on the back of the top, pull it straight back and lift it off. Now next we'll want to remove the lower access panel, and again there are 2 screws that secure that to the cabinet. You just locate those, one on either side, and just tilt out slightly on the bottom of that panel and let it drop down. And we can set that aside. Now next we'll remove 2 screws that secure the bottom of the front panel, and as well we'll disconnect the harness to the door switch. Now to disconnect that harness you will need to lift up on that end of it to release the locking tab on both sides. Also need to release this clip that holds the harness to the air inlet assembly. So take a flat blade screwdriver, just go in under the front edge of that, pry it open and release the harness. Now next we'll open the dryer door and we'll remove 2 Phillips screws on either side of the lint filter, and then we can close that door up. Now next we'll need to remove the control panel. And if we look in behind it, we'll see 2 locking tabs, one on either side. So with our flat blade screwdriver, we're just going to slightly depress those to the outside while pulling out on the bottom of that control panel. Once we've released the 2 outside ones, there are also 3 tabs across the top. You can just lift up on the control panel enough to clear those. And if you need to, use your flat blade screwdriver just to assist that. And once we've released those tabs, we can lift that control panel up and just lay it across the top. And if you wish, reach in and disconnect the harness that attaches to the control board. Simply depress the locking tab a little bit, slide the harness connector off the end of the board, and pull it out through, and then we can set that aside. Well, next we'll remove the 2 remaining screws that secure the front panel to the cabinet. And you'll need to support that front panel as you remove the last of the screws. Then lift it off and set it aside. Well, next we'll disconnect the harness to these sensors. And again, we'll use a flat blade screwdriver and just carefully go in under the edge of that locking tab. Just spread that enough to clear it on both sides. And we're going to remove 2 screws that secure the air inlet to the blower housing. And they're typically brass colored screws. We do one in the 11 o'clock position and typically one down in about the 5 o'clock position. So remove both of those. Then we'll remove the 2 bottom screws on that front bulkhead, and then we'll loosen the 2 top ones because they have keyhole slots that hold that bulkhead to the cabinet. So just loosen it 3 or 4 turns. Then we're going to lift up on that whole assembly so that we can clear the lower portion of that inlet assembly. And just pull it out enough to clear those 2 keyhole slots on the top. Now we'll try to stay engaged to the drum with the front drum rollers, but if you tilt out on it, it will drop right out. So we'll set that aside. Now next we'll need to disconnect the belt from the motor pulley and the idler pulley. So we'll reach one hand in around the center and one over top of the blower housing until you feel the belt. You'll see how it wraps around the idler pulley, so grasp the idler pulley, pull it to the left to release the tension, slide the belt off to the back, and then carefully set the idler pulley down. Now next we'll remove this front cross piece that secures the top of the cabinet. There are 2 screws in the front, as well as 2 more across the top. Now you may also wish to remove this single screw that secures the mounting bracket for the control board. Now with that screw removed, you just support that bracket and then let it sit down on the drum. Remove this support piece in the front and set it aside. Now next, take the belt and make sure that it's not hooked on the idler pulley below. You should have about this much slack on the top. So if we just use that belt to lift up on the drum and then pull it slightly forward, bring it out through the opening at the front of the cabinet, support that mounting bracket, and then lift the drum clear and set it aside. Now to replace the heating element, I'm going to start by removing the 2 wire terminals at the front. So take a pair of needle nose pliers and just pry those off and grasp the terminal, not the wire. And we'll also inspect those terminals, and if there's any signs of arcing or corrosion, they will need to be replaced. And now next, using our 1/4" nut driver, we'll remove the screws that secure the high limit thermostat and the thermal cutout to the side of the housing. And then we'll remove 4 screws that secure the top portion of that housing to the bottom. Then we'll lift up at the front edge of this housing and then just rock it back and forth while we're holding it up to remove it from the outlet at the back. And if you dislodge the spring clip, you'll need to reinsert that into the top portion of that housing till the little locking tab engages in that rectangular slot and the rounded tab is pointing upwards. Now with that removed, we can lift the old element out of the housing and discard it. Inspect the new element before we put it in position. Make sure that none of the isolators are cracked or broken, and set it in position, taking note of the little locating tabs in the middle that will fit into the rectangular slots. Make sure that lines up. And again, we're going to insert that tab into the upper half of that rear opening, and then carefully press the 2 halves of that housing together. We'll reinstall the retaining screws, and we'll reinstall the limiter and the thermostat, and tighten those screws securely. Then reconnect the 2 larger terminals to the ends of the element. Make sure they're nice and secure. And we're now ready to put the drum and the belt back in. Now you won't be able to see the idler pulley and motor pulley when you're reinstalling the belt, so we'll give you a visual of how that will look when it's on there. The belt will just drape loosely with the drum in place. We're going to pull it over top of the motor pulley, down underneath the idler, and to do that we'd have to pull that idler fully to the left. And it will end up in this position. Now when reinstalling the drum, we're going to begin by wrapping the belt around the drum, and we'll have the ribbed side of the belt facing the drum. And we're going to lift it up into position. And we're going to want to make sure that we engage the rear drum rollers. And when they're properly engaged, the drum will actually sit flush with the back bulkhead and rotate easily. Now next we'll install the front bulkhead. Now when installing that, we're going to begin by making sure that we have the cover for the blower housing inserted into the opening first. Then we'll lift up on the drum, so that we can tuck those front rollers underneath the edge of the drum. And once we have that positioned properly, we can rotate the front until we engage those keyhole slots, and then it should sit flush. We'll start by tightening those two screws at the top and then install the two at the bottom. And once we have those tight, we'll line up those two brass or gold colored screws and secure the inlet duct assembly to the blower housing. And then we'll reconnect the harness to the sensors, making sure that they're fully pushed together and that the locking tabs are engaged. Now with that done, we'll next reconnect the belt to the motor pulley and the idler pulley. So one hand in through on the right hand side, one in on the left. Find the belt. You should have the rib side facing up. Take hold of the idler pulley and rotate it to the left. Wrap the belt that comes down on the left side of that drum over the top of the idler pulley, off of the bottom of it, back to the left and over to the top of the motor pulley, off the motor pulley on the bottom and over to the right. And just rotate that drum a couple of times. There should be a bit of resistance. And now we can put the front support on. So position that across the top of the cabinet. Install the two screws down through the top and then the two screws through the front. Then put the control panel bracket back into position. Next, we'll install the front panel. Now with the support piece across the top in place, we can next put the front panel on. So we'll lift it up into position, support it from the bottom, and we'll line it up so that the screw holes on each side at the top line up. And just start one of those by hand. Go to the opposite side. And then we can go ahead and tighten those. And just before you snug them up, just lift up on that whole housing and tighten them that way. We'll then install the two screws on the bottom. Then we'll reconnect the door switch harness. Line up the harness ends, press them firmly together so that the locking tabs engage. And then we'll need to fit that harness into that little retaining clip and make sure the wires lay flat in there. And press that clip until it snaps together. And we'll go ahead and put the lower access panel on. Now when installing that lower access panel, just make sure that this lip fits in underneath the edge of the front panel. Hold it up in position and then install the two retaining screws. And we'll want to tighten those securely so we don't have any rattles. Then next we'll replace the two screws that secure the front panel to the bulkhead. And now we can go ahead and put the control panel on. So we'll start by feeding the harness through that rectangular opening in that support bracket. And then we're going to engage the three tabs across the top that fit into this plastic piece. There's also a tab on the bottom that will fit into that rectangular opening in that metal support bracket. But we need to engage the top ones first. And just pivot it down into position. That will push the two side ones through. And make sure both of those engage. Then reconnect the harness to the control board. And make sure it's inserted all the way that the little locking tab engages. And we're now ready to put the main top on. So we'll line that up side to side. We'll set it in about a half or 3/4 of an inch back from the control panel. And slide it forward so that both sides engage, and it should lay flat. Then we'll install the 2 screws at the back. We're now ready to reconnect the power, and our repair is complete.